She folds each uniform with practiced precision, invisible to the soldiers who surround her. They laugh, they mock, they toss their soiled laundry at her feet. Just another civilian contractor, they assume. Until the day Captain Calloway sees her sleeve ride up, revealing scars that tell a different story. Scars that come only from battles most never survive. In an instant, everything changes. The woman they ignored, the woman they disrespected, carries the marks of a warrior so elite her very existence was classified. Some heroes wear medals. Others just fold laundry, waiting for a war that never truly ends. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story resonates with you, consider subscribing to hear more untold tales of those who serve in silence. Steam billowed through the laundry facility at Fort Blackwood Military Base, carrying with it the scent of industrial detergent and pressed cotton. Aderin Thorne worked methodically amid the haze, her weathered hands moving with practiced efficiency as she folded a pile of combat uniforms. Despite the sweltering heat that caused most workers to roll up their sleeves or wear the shortest regulation attire allowed, Aderin kept her long-sleeved shirt buttoned tightly at her wrists. At 42, she moved with a certain economy of motion, never wasting energy, never making unnecessary gestures. Her steel-gray eyes remained downcast as she worked, though they missed nothing, constantly scanning her surroundings in a habit so ingrained she no longer realized she was doing it. The facility bustled with activity around her, a constant stream of personnel coming and going. Young recruits dropped off uniforms with careless tosses, senior officers barked orders about their specific requirements, and staff joked loudly among themselves. Yet amid this human current, Aderin remained somehow separate, a stone in a stream around which the water simply flowed without disturbing. Staff Sergeant Mackey pushed through the swinging doors, his imposing frame followed by 3 younger soldiers, all carrying armfuls of uniforms. "Hey, laundry lady," he called out, dropping his heap directly onto Aderin's freshly folded pile. "These need to be done by 0600 tomorrow. Combat-ready creases or the colonel will have my ass." Aderin nodded without looking up, already refolding the disturbed pile beneath his new additions. One of Mackey's soldiers, a lanky private with a patchy attempt at facial hair, tossed a particularly mud-caked uniform on top. "That one might need extra attention," he said with a smirk that his companions quickly mirrored. "Ran some special drills in the marsh today," another added. "Hope you have some strong detergent." The third soldier leaned against the counter watching Aderin work. He began mimicking her methodical folding with exaggerated movements, drawing laughs from his comrades. "Think she's former military," he stage whispered. "Nah, probably couldn't handle basic." Throughout their commentary, Aderin showed no reaction beyond a small muscle that twitched almost imperceptibly along her jawline. Her hands never faltered in their rhythm, never betrayed any emotion she might have felt at their words. "Have these done right," Mackey added as he turned to leave. "Last batch had creases so soft they'd make my grandmother blush." The group exited as loudly as they had entered, leaving behind the disarrayed piles and their lingering laughter. Aderin simply continued working, rearranging the uniforms into orderly stacks and beginning the process of inspection, washing, drying, and pressing that would consume the next several hours. Lieutenant Kessler arrived shortly after, a tall, angular man with a perpetual furrow between his brows. He came to retrieve his uniforms, inspecting each one with unmasked criticism. "This one's wrinkled," he said, holding up a sleeve for inspection before tossing it back onto the counter. "Do it again." He did not wait for acknowledgement before turning to leave, nearly colliding with another officer entering the facility. Captain Ezra Calloway stepped aside smoothly, allowing Kessler to pass. "Lieutenant," Calloway nodded, receiving a similar acknowledgement before Kessler exited. Unlike the others who had passed through, Captain Calloway carried himself with a quiet confidence that required no posturing. At 38, his face showed the weathering of someone who had seen more than his fair share of hardship, but his eyes remained alert and observant. He placed his own uniform on the counter with considerably more care than the others had shown. "No rush on this one, Miss..." He paused, his eyes falling to the small name badge pinned to her shirt. "Thorne," she answered, her voice soft but clear, lacking the servile tone many in her position adopted when addressing officers. Calloway studied her for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Something in her posture, perhaps, or the way she had positioned herself with a clear view of both exits, despite her seemingly focused attention on her work. "Thank you for your service, Ms. Thorne," he said finally. Her eyes flicked up for the briefest moment, meeting his before returning to her task. "I just do laundry, sir." "Everyone serves in their own way." As he left, Adarin watched him go from the corner of her eye, a slight furrow forming between her brows. There was something in his manner that suggested recognition, though she was certain they had never met. She had been careful about that. The day continued its usual rhythm, a ceaseless flow of uniforms, impatient soldiers, and the steady hum of industrial washing machines. Adarin moved through it all like a shadow, performing her duties with quiet efficiency, speaking only when directly addressed, and then with the minimum required words. It was a role she had perfected over 3 years at Fort Blackwood, one that allowed her to blend into the background of military life, to become just another fixture, as unremarkable as the green exit signs or the motivational posters adorning the walls. Invisibility was its own form of armor, she had learned, often more effective than Kevlar. At the end of her shift, Adarin returned to her quarters in the civilian staff housing section of the base. The room was sparse to the point of austerity, a single bed made with military precision, a small desk with a chair, and a standard-issue dresser. No decorations adorned the walls, no photographs brightened the surfaces, except for a single frame that lay face down in the drawer of her bedside table. She locked the door behind her, checking twice that the deadbolt was secured before crossing to the narrow closet. From inside, she retrieved a small footlocker, secured with a combination lock that she opened with practiced movements. The contents were few but telling, remnants of another life carefully preserved, one that bore little resemblance to her current existence folding laundry for soldiers who barely registered her presence. Sitting on the edge of her bed, Adarin slowly rolled up her sleeve, revealing a latticework of scars that traversed her forearm like a roadmap of violence. Some were surgical in their precision, others jagged and brutal. Together, they told stories of firefights in unnamed locations, of extraction missions gone wrong, of battles fought far from any recognized front line. She touched them lightly, one by one, eyes distant as memories surfaced. Each scar was a tally, not just of wounds survived, but of comrades lost, of missions completed at costs too high to measure in any currency but blood and lives. After a moment, she rolled her sleeve down again, concealing the evidence of her former life. She returned the footlocker to its hiding place, locked it securely, and prepared for another day of invisibility. The following morning brought a change to her routine. Instead of her usual shift in the laundry facility, Adarin was assigned to assist in the officers' mess hall, covering for another worker who had fallen ill. The change unsettled her, not because the work was more difficult, but because it meant new patterns to learn, new faces to avoid, new potential recognition to evade. She moved quietly between the tables, collecting empty trays and wiping down surfaces. The officers largely ignored her, continuing their conversations about training schedules, upcoming deployments, and base politics without lowering their voices or acknowledging her presence. Major Donovan, a stocky man with a perpetually florid complexion, turned suddenly in his chair as Adarin passed behind him, knocking a tray from her hands. Dishes clattered to the floor, drawing the attention of everyone in the mess hall. The sudden silence was deafening. "Watch yourself, civilian," Donovan snapped, making no move to help as Adarin knelt to clean the mess. "Sorry, sir," she murmured, her movements quick and efficient as she gathered the broken pieces. Across the room, Captain Calloway watched the interaction with interest. It was not Adarin's apology that caught his attention, but rather the way she had reacted the instant before the collision, an instinctive shift to a defensive stance that had been quickly suppressed. It was the reaction of someone with combat training, not a civilian laundry worker. Later that afternoon, Calloway found himself in a security briefing in one of the glass-walled conference rooms that overlooked the main corridor of the administrative building. As the base security officer droned on about updated protocols and potential vulnerabilities, Calloway's attention was drawn to a figure passing by outside, a laundry cart before her. Adarin moved with the same economy he had noticed before, her steps measured and deliberate. But there was something else, something in the way she navigated the busy hallway, always maintaining optimal distance from others, never turning her back fully to any doorway, eyes constantly scanning in a pattern too systematic to be casual observation. Suddenly, the base alarm sounded, a short burst that indicated a security drill rather than an actual emergency. Personnel in the corridor immediately quickened their pace, moving toward designated secure locations as they had been trained to do. They flowed around Aderin as if she were invisible, many nearly colliding with her laundry cart in their haste. Calloway watched as her eyes tracked the security team that jogged past, noting how her gaze assessed their formation, their equipment, their response time. He saw her slight frown as she identified flaws in their approach, vulnerabilities that no civilian laundry worker should recognize. His suspicions deepened. Later that day, Calloway made his way to the laundry facility, timing his arrival for when he knew most staff would have departed. As expected, Aderin was still there, working alone among the now silent machines. "You always work this late, Ms. Thorne," he said, phrasing it as an observation rather than a question. She nodded without looking up, continuing to fold a uniform with precise creases. "Fewer interruptions after hours, sir." "Efficient," he commented, setting his uniform on the counter between them. "Must get lonely, though." "I prefer quiet." As she reached for his uniform, her sleeve rode up slightly. Calloway's gaze fell on the exposed skin of her forearm, and he froze, recognition flooding through him like ice water. The scars were distinctive, not just in their pattern but in their specific placement and type. They were not the random injuries of civilian life but the calculated damage of specialized combat operations, the kind that left marks no ordinary soldier would carry. "That's from Operation Blackstone Ridge," he said quietly. 2014. Aderin went still, her hand hovering over the uniform, neither continuing her reach nor withdrawing. "Only 3 operators survived that mission," Calloway continued, his voice barely above a whisper now. "And none of them were women, according to the official record." She began to pull back, but Calloway gently caught her arm, not restraining but rather confirming what his eyes had already told him. "Your Nightshade." The name hung in the air between them, a ghost from a past that had supposedly been buried years ago. "The record said you died in Samara," he continued. "I was there for the extraction. We searched for survivors for 3 days." Slowly, Aderin raised her eyes to meet his. In that moment, something shifted, the carefully maintained facade falling away. Her posture straightened subtly, her gaze sharpening with an intensity that transformed her entire presence. The invisible woman was gone, replaced by someone whose very stillness spoke of lethal capability. "Sometimes," she said, her voice no longer soft but measured and clear, "it's easier to be dead, Captain." Calloway slowly, deliberately stood at attention and saluted her. "Ma'am?" At that moment, the base alarm sounded, piercing and insistent, nothing like the brief burst of the earlier drill. Red emergency lights began to flash throughout the facility, casting eerie shadows across their faces. "Security breach in progress," announced the PA system, the voice unnaturally calm against the urgent wailing of the alarm. "All personnel to designated secure locations. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." Calloway's radio crackled to life at his hip. He unclipped it quickly, his eyes never leaving Aderin's face. "Calloway," he answered. "Captain, we have multiple system infiltrations," came the tense voice of Lieutenant Kessler. "Command center compromised. Perimeter security offline in sectors 3 through 7. "On my way," Calloway responded, returning the radio to his belt. He hesitated, clearly torn between duty and the discovery he had just made. Aderin's expression had changed completely, the mask of submission and servility gone as if it had never existed. Her eyes were sharp, focused, analyzing information with rapid precision. "How long has your cybersecurity team been tracking this?" she asked, her voice now carrying the unmistakable tone of command. Calloway blinked in surprise. 3 days. How did you know we were tracking anything?" "Because I've been watching them watching. Your firewalls have been probed 7 times this week." She moved toward the door with purpose. "This isn't a random attack." Without waiting for his response, she strode into the corridor, her entire demeanor transformed. Gone was the invisible woman who had blended into the background of base life for years. In her place stood an operator whose very movement spoke of deadly capability and absolute confidence. Calloway followed, having to quicken his pace to match her stride. Around them, personnel rushed in organized chaos, following emergency protocols with varying degrees of efficiency. "Where are you going?" Calloway asked, falling in beside her. "Command center," she replied without slowing. "That's where I'd hit first if I wanted to cripple this base. You can't just walk into a secured command center during an active breach." For the first time, a ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Watch me." They moved against the flow of traffic, Adarin navigating the corridors with the familiarity of someone who had studied the layout extensively. She turned down a service hallway that Calloway knew was rarely used, leading to a maintenance access point near the command center. "How do you know about this route?" he asked as they hurried through the dimly lit passage. "I make it my business to know all the ways in and out," she answered, "just like whoever is attacking your systems right now." The maintenance corridor ended at a service door that required keycard access. Without hesitation, Adarin pulled a base maintenance ID from her pocket and swiped it through the reader. The light flashed green, and the door unlocked with a soft click. "Maintenance has access to almost everything," she explained at Calloway's surprised expression. "Nobody notices the people who clean up after everyone else." They emerged into a short hallway that led directly to the rear entrance of the command center. Two armed guards stood at attention, their postures stiffening as they spotted the approaching pair. "Sir," one began, his hand moving instinctively toward his sidearm as he spotted Adarin in civilian clothes. "This area is restricted during the security alert." "She's with me," Calloway said firmly. "Security consultant, we need immediate access." The guard hesitated, protocol warring with the direct order from a superior officer during an emergency. "Your systems are being attacked through a shadow entry point in your supply chain management network," Adarin stated flatly. "It's a technique developed for Operation Stillwater. Unless you want to explain to Colonel Vantage why you delayed the only person who can recognize and counter it, I suggest you open that door." Something in her tone, the absolute authority with which she spoke, convinced the guard. He nodded sharply and keyed his access code into the panel beside the door. The command center was in controlled chaos when they entered. Screens flashed with warning messages, communications officers worked frantically at their stations, and in the center of it all, Colonel Vantage stood with his hands braced on the main tactical table, his face a mask of contained fury. He looked up as they entered, his eyes narrowing at the sight of Adarin. "Captain Calloway," he began, his voice dangerously quiet. "What is this civilian doing in my command center during an active security breach?" Calloway stepped forward. "Sir, this is Commander Adarin Thorne, callsign Nightshade, Special Activities Division, presumed KIA 8 years ago." The pronouncement landed in the room like a physical weight. Several nearby officers turned to stare, operations momentarily forgotten. Colonel Vantage straightened slowly, his expression shifting from anger to disbelief. "Nightshade," he repeated. "The ghost of Samara?" Adarin neither confirmed nor denied, instead stepping forward to address the situation at hand. "Your security protocols are being exploited by someone with inside knowledge. I've noted 7 vulnerabilities in your response patterns." Without waiting for permission, she moved to an unoccupied terminal, her fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced ease. "They're using a shadow entry point through your supply chain management system. It's a technique developed for Operation Stillwater." She looked up, meeting Vantage's stunned gaze. "One of mine." For a long moment, the colonel stood frozen, clearly processing the implications of her presence and her words. Then military pragmatism reasserted itself. "What do you need?" he asked simply. "Full system access and your best cyber team." Vantage nodded to a nearby lieutenant. "Grant Commander Thorne Alpha clearance, now." For the next tense minutes, Adarin directed the defense with the precision of someone who had fought these battles before. Under her guidance, the team isolated and neutralized the threat, tracking it back to its source and implementing countermeasures that seemed to anticipate each move the attackers made. "They're retreating," announced one of the cyber specialists, looking up from his screen with an expression of stunned respect. "Attack vectors closing, system integrity restoring." A collective breath seemed to release throughout the command center. Vantage turned to Adarin, studying her with new eyes, seeing past the disguise of the humble laundry worker to the elite operator beneath. "Commander Thorne," he said finally, "I'm not sure what circumstances brought you to my laundry facility, but I'm damn sure you don't belong there." Adarin met his gaze steadily. "With respect, sir, sometimes the best place to hide is where no one thinks to look." And why were you hiding? She stood at perfect attention, her bearing now unmistakably military. That's classified, sir, even from you. Vantage studied her for a long moment, then nodded almost imperceptibly. Well, I think it's time you came out of the shadows, Commander. The days that followed brought a seismic shift to Adarin's existence at Fort Blackwood. Word spread quickly, as it always did in military installations, though the details remained shrouded in the necessary secrecy of classified operations. Still, the change in how she was perceived was immediate and absolute. The same soldiers who had tossed dirty laundry at her feet now stood at attention when she passed. Lieutenant Kessler, who had dismissed her so casually, found reasons to be elsewhere when she entered a room. Staff Sergeant Mackey attempted an awkward apology that Adarin accepted with the same quiet reserve she had always shown, though now it registered as restraint rather than submission. 3 days after the security breach, Adarin stood in the Fort Blackwood Memorial Garden, dressed in a formal uniform that had been retrieved from storage somewhere, complete with the ribbons and commendations she had earned in another life. The uniform felt simultaneously foreign and familiar against her skin, like returning to a childhood home years later. Captain Calloway approached, his own dress uniform immaculate in the morning light. He stood beside her in silence for a moment, both of them facing the memorial wall where names were etched in stone. "The records are being corrected," he said finally. "Your team will be remembered." Adarin nodded, her fingers reaching out to trace a specific name. Lieutenant Mercer Thorne. "My brother," she explained quietly, answering Calloway's unasked question. "The mission that killed him was redacted from history, like it never happened." Her fingers lingered on the engraved letters. "Like he never mattered." "Is that why you disappeared? Because of what happened to your brother?" Adarin's expression remained carefully neutral. "Partly. The rest is still classified." "There are rumors," Calloway ventured, "about what happened in Samara, about why one of our most decorated operators would choose to disappear." "There are always rumors, Captain." Her voice held a warning note. He accepted the boundary with a nod. "What will you do now?" Adarin looked across the base to the distant mountains that framed the horizon. "I'm still figuring that out, but I'm done hiding." Later that afternoon, Adarin walked through the corridors of the administrative building, headed for a meeting with Colonel Vantage. The difference in her movement was subtle but unmistakable, a shift from intentional invisibility to composed presence. She no longer avoided eye contact or hunched her shoulders to appear smaller. She walked with the natural authority that had been hers before, an authority she had deliberately suppressed for years. As she passed the laundry facility, she paused, looking through the open doorway at the steam-filled room where she had spent countless hours folding uniforms, hiding in plain sight. New workers moved among the machines, unaware of the significance the space held for her. Staff Sergeant Mackey emerged from an adjoining corridor, stopping abruptly when he saw her. For a moment, he seemed unsure how to address her, the hierarchy between them suddenly and drastically reversed. "Commander Thorne," he managed finally, standing at attention. Adarin acknowledged him with a slight nod. "At ease, Sergeant." "Ma'am, I wanted to apologize properly for my behavior. If I had known who you were, I never would have. The things I said, the way I treated you, it was unbecoming of, we never would have. It was completely, I just wanted to say, we, the men, we feel terrible about, everything, and I just wanted to." "Sergeant," Adarin interrupted his stammering, her voice calm. "War teaches us many things. One of the most valuable is that what matters isn't the rank or the uniform. It's the person wearing it." She glanced back at the laundry facility. "Everyone serves, in their own way." She left him standing there, continuing toward her meeting with a straight back and steady stride. As she turned the corner, she passed the group of young soldiers who had once mocked her. They immediately stood at attention, their faces a mixture of awe and embarrassment. Adarin paused, studying them for a moment. "Gentlemen," she said simply, then added with the ghost of a smile, "your boots could use a shine." They stared after her as she walked away, her steps measured and purposeful, no longer the invisible woman, but a commander reclaiming her place in a world she had left behind. In Colonel Vantage's office, Adarin stood at parade rest, waiting as he reviewed a file on his desk, the contents of which were clearly about her. After several minutes, he closed the folder and looked up. "Your record is impressive, Commander, even with the redactions." He leaned back in his chair. "I've spoken with some people at Division. They're very interested in your sudden resurrection." "I imagine they would be, sir. Care to tell me why one of our most decorated special operators has been hiding as a laundry worker on my base for 3 years? As I said before, sir, that information remains classified." Vantage nodded, accepting but not pleased. "Well, Division wants you back in the field. They're reactivating your commission, effective immediately." For the first time, Adarin showed a flicker of uncertainty. "And if I decline? Is that what you want to do? Go back to folding laundry?" "No, sir, but I left for reasons that haven't changed." Vantage studied her thoughtfully. "Sometimes, Commander, the best way to honor those we've lost isn't by disappearing ourselves, but by continuing the work they believed in." The words struck a chord, visible in the slight shift of Adarin's posture. "Take some time," Vantage advised. "Think about where you can do the most good." The following morning, Adarin stood at the edge of the training grounds, watching a group of new recruits struggle through their morning exercises. Their faces were flushed with exertion, movements uncoordinated and inefficient. She remembered her own training, so many years ago, the ruthless instructors who had shaped her into something beyond an ordinary soldier. Captain Calloway approached, 2 steaming cups in his hands. He offered one to her silently, and she accepted with a nod of thanks. "Colonel Vantage tells me Division wants to reactivate you," he said after a moment. Adarin sipped her coffee, eyes still on the recruits. "They do. Will you accept?" She considered the question, giving it the weight it deserved. "I spent 3 years hiding in plain sight, becoming invisible. It becomes a habit, living that way, seeing without being seen." "It seems like a lonely existence," Calloway observed. "It was necessary." She turned to face him fully. "Did you know there was an investigation after Samara? Quiet, internal, the kind that never makes official records." Calloway shook his head. "I heard rumors. Nothing concrete. Operation Kingfisher was supposed to be simple. Extract a high-value target from hostile territory. My team was sent in with faulty intelligence. What we found wasn't what we expected." Her eyes grew distant with memory. "We discovered that someone within our own command structure had been selling information, deliberate leaks that cost lives. Was that why you disappeared? To investigate internally?" Adarin's smile was thin and without humor. "No. I disappeared because someone tried to make sure I stayed dead in Samara. When I survived, it became clear that my continued existence was inconvenient for certain individuals with considerable influence." Calloway's expression darkened. "And now Division wants you back. Do you think it's safe?" Safety was never part of the job description. She looked back at the recruits, their faces so young, so unaware of what might lie ahead. "But hiding hasn't solved anything. The people responsible are still out there, still in positions of power. You think going back in will help you find them? It might. Or it might just put a target on my back again." She straightened, decision made. "But I didn't join to be safe. I joined to make a difference." Later that day, Adarin found herself in an unmarked office deep within the administrative section of the base. The room was Spartan, containing only a desk, 3 chairs, and a secure computer terminal. The man who sat across from her wore no insignia of rank, but his bearing made it clear he was accustomed to authority. "Commander Thorne," he greeted her, "I'm Director Harlow. I've been asked to brief you on what's happened since your, shall we say, sabbatical." Adarin said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "The individuals you were concerned about have advanced their positions considerably. The one you knew as Vesper is now overseeing multiple critical operations in the Eastern Theater. Archer has been promoted to the Strategic Planning Division for all special operations in 3 regions. And the evidence I gathered before Samara?" Harlow's expression remained carefully neutral. "Missing, along with the backup files you allegedly secured." "Allegedly," Adarin repeated, the word carrying a weight of unspoken meaning. "There are those who believe you fabricated the evidence to cover your own involvement in the intelligence leaks. Your disappearance was viewed by some as tantamount to a confession." Adarin's face betrayed nothing, but her eyes hardened fractionally. "Convenient narrative." "Indeed, particularly since the inquiry was led by Vesper himself." Harlow leaned forward slightly. Your reappearance presents certain opportunities, Commander. There are those of us who have harbored doubts about the official conclusions regarding Samara and your role in it. You want me to go back in, to gather proof again. We want you to accept the reactivation offer, to return to duty under the supervision of those who betrayed you, to let them believe you've been broken, rehabilitated, rendered harmless. While I what? Spy on my superiors? Harlow smiled thinly. While you do what you've always done, Commander, serve your country by identifying and neutralizing threats, even when those threats wear the same uniform you do. Adarin considered his words, weighing risks and possibilities. And who exactly do I report to in this scenario? How do I know this isn't just another trap? A fair question. Harlow reached into his jacket and withdrew a small flash drive, sliding it across the desk to her. This contains communication protocols and verification codes. The only other copies are held by individuals whose identities I don't know. Compartmentalization is necessary in this case. Adarin picked up the drive, turning it over in her fingers. What about my brother? He died because of their betrayal. Will there be justice for him? If we succeed, yes. His name will be cleared, his sacrifice recognized. Harlow's expression softened slightly. I knew Mercer, Commander. He was one of the best. He deserved better than what happened. She slipped the drive into her pocket. When do I start? Immediately. There's a transport leaving for division headquarters at 0600 tomorrow. You'll be on it. Harlow stood, signaling the end of the meeting. One last thing, Commander. Trust no one. Not even those who seem to be allies. Even you? Especially me. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the mountains surrounding Fort Blackwood sharp against the pale sky. Adarin stood on the tarmac beside the waiting transport plane, her few possessions packed in a standard-issue duffel. She wore her uniform now, the rank insignia catching the early light. Colonel Vantage approached, hand extended. Commander, I wish you well at division. She shook his hand firmly. Thank you, sir, for everything. I hope you find what you're looking for, he said, his words carrying a deeper meaning that told Adarin he knew more than he let on. Captain Calloway was the last to say goodbye, standing somewhat awkwardly at the edge of the tarmac. When Adarin approached him, he straightened to attention. Ma'am. At ease, Captain. We're past formalities, I think. He relaxed slightly. I never got the chance to tell you. I was part of the search team in Samara. We found the bodies of your team, but not yours. I always wondered why. I was separated during the ambush, she said quietly. Took shelter in an abandoned building. By the time I could move again, everyone was gone, both sides. You made it out alone? She nodded. 18 days on foot. When I finally reached friendly territory, I learned about the investigation, the accusations. Someone had already decided I was either dead or a traitor. It seemed safer to let them believe the former. Calloway studied her face. And now you're walking right back into it. Sometimes the only way out is through. She offered her hand. Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. He took her hand, holding it a moment longer than strictly necessary. Be careful, Commander. Always am, Captain. As the transport lifted off, Adarin watched Fort Blackwood recede below her, the place where she had hidden becoming smaller until it was just another patch in the vast landscape. She felt exposed now, visible again after years of carefully cultivated anonymity. It was both freeing and terrifying. 6 hours later, the transport touched down at division headquarters, a sprawling complex of buildings surrounded by security perimeters and obscured by carefully maintained disinformation about its true purpose. As Adarin descended from the plane, she was met by a stern-faced officer who introduced himself as Major Reeves. Commander Thorne, welcome back to the land of the living. His tone made it clear that her return was not universally celebrated. You'll be debriefed immediately. Follow me. The debriefing room was stark and clinical, designed to be both intimidating and disorienting. 3 senior officers sat behind a long table, their faces impassive as Adarin entered. She recognized one immediately, Colonel Victor Landry, call sign Vesper, the man who had orchestrated the betrayal that had cost her team and her brother their lives. He showed no surprise at seeing her, which told Adarin that he had been well informed of her survival and return. Commander Thorne, he began, his voice smooth and controlled. Your reappearance is quite remarkable. We had, of course, presumed you killed in action." "Clearly an error, sir," she replied, keeping her own voice neutral. "Indeed, one of many surrounding the Samara operation, it seems." He glanced down at a file before him. "You understand that there are questions about your activities both during that mission and in the years since." "I'm prepared to answer any questions, sir." "Good. Let's begin with why you chose to assume a false identity rather than reporting in after your escape from Samara." For the next 4 hours, Adarin navigated a minefield of questions, half-truths, and deliberate traps. She told a carefully constructed story of injury, confusion, and eventual disillusionment that had led her to seek anonymity rather than return to duty. She admitted to doubts about the intelligence that had led to the Samara disaster, but stopped short of making direct accusations. Throughout, she watched Landry's reactions, noting the subtle tells of a man who believed he was in complete control of the situation. He thought her broken, perhaps even cowed by her years in hiding. It was a misconception she would use to her advantage. When the debriefing finally ended, Adarin was assigned quarters and informed that she would begin a reintegration program the following morning. As she was escorted to her room, she noted security camera placements, patrol patterns, access points, all the details she would need in the days to come. Her quarters were small but private, a consideration of her rank rather than any particular respect. Once alone, she conducted a thorough sweep for surveillance devices, finding 2 audio monitors and 1 camera, all positioned exactly where protocol dictated they should be. That meant there were likely others hidden elsewhere, in locations only someone with insider knowledge would choose. She unpacked methodically, arranging her few possessions in a way that would allow her to detect if they were disturbed. The flash drive from Harlow remained secured in a hidden pocket she had sewn into her uniform, a precaution from her previous life that had become second nature. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Adarin thought of her brother. Mercer had been the idealist between them, the one who truly believed in the oath they had taken. His betrayal by their own command had been more than a tactical failure, it had been a fundamental violation of everything he stood for. "I'm going to finish what we started," she whispered into the darkness. "I promise." The reintegration program began at ERO 500 the next morning with a physical assessment that pushed even Adarin's considerable endurance to its limits. Despite 3 years away from formal training, she performed at levels that impressed even the skeptical evaluators. Her body remembered what her mind had tried to forget. After physical testing came psychological evaluation, cognitive assessment, and finally a meeting with the division's chief of operations, General Ellis. He was a broad-shouldered man with calculating eyes who did not rise when she entered his office. "Commander Thorne, your test results are impressive." "Thank you, sir." "Cut the formality, Thorne. We both know you're here under unusual circumstances." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit." She complied, maintaining perfect posture. "I'll be direct. Half my staff thinks you're a traitor who should be in prison. The other half thinks you're a convenient scapegoat who might still be useful. I haven't decided which group is right." "With respect, sir, my record spoke for itself before Samara." "And after? What does going AWOL for 3 years say about your commitment to duty?" Adarin met his gaze steadily. "It says I'm willing to do whatever is necessary to complete my mission, sir, even when that means making difficult choices." Ellis studied her for a long moment. "You'll be assigned to Colonel Landry's command group. He specifically requested you." "I understand, sir." "Do you? Because he was the one who led the investigation that concluded you were either dead or compromised. If you're harboring any resentment about that, now would be the time to speak up." Adarin's expression revealed nothing. "The investigation followed protocol, sir. I have no personal feelings about it." "Good." Ellis leaned back in his chair. "Because Landry is about to oversee one of our most critical operations, and he wants you on it. Operation Broken Arrow. Briefing is at 0800 tomorrow." "I'll be ready, sir." As she left the general's office, Adarin felt the weight of watchful eyes. She was back in the world she had fled, surrounded by the same dangers, facing the same enemies. But this time, she was not alone. Somewhere in the shadows, Harlow and his unnamed allies were waiting, counting on her to find the evidence that would expose the corruption that had cost so many lives. That night, in the secure privacy of the base's memorial garden, Aderin stood before the wall of names, her fingers tracing her brother's engraved letters. The garden was empty at this hour, the soft lighting creating pools of shadow between the memorial stones. "I'm close, Mercer," she whispered. "Closer than I've been in years." A soft footstep behind her made her turn. Captain Calloway stood at the entrance to the garden, his expression solemn. "Captain, I didn't expect to see you here." "Special assignment," he explained, moving closer. "I've been temporarily attached to Division for Operation Broken Arrow." Aderin's eyes narrowed slightly. "Convenient timing." "I requested the assignment when I heard you'd been placed on the team." He stopped beside her, looking at the memorial wall. "I thought you might need someone watching your back." "And who's watching yours, Captain?" His smile was grim. "That's the question, isn't it? Who can we trust in all this?" Aderin turned back to the wall, to her brother's name among so many others. "Trust is a luxury we can't afford right now. But allies, those we might need." "Then consider me an ally, Commander." He offered his hand. "Whatever comes next." She took his hand, the contact brief but firm, a silent agreement between them. "Whatever comes next," she echoed, her gaze returning to the wall of names. The past could not be changed, but perhaps, with allies both known and hidden, the future might still hold the justice her brother deserved.